We are very happy to have with us today Dr. Michelle Sexton from the USA. She will be presenting Happy with Terpenes, Sustaining Whole Plant Medicine. But just by way of background, as you make your way to the stage, Doctor, Dr. Sexton is the Medical Research Director at the Centre for the Study of Cannabis and Social Policy. She serves as an editor and technical advisor for the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia. Yes, a cannabis monograph. She's presented her research internationally, as she's doing today, and is published in peer-reviewed journals. Dr. Sexton's clinical practice, research and teaching focus is on the medicinal or medical use of cannabis across a range of conditions and age groups. She is also a member of the International Cannabinoid Research Society, the International Association of Cannabinoid Medicine, and the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. She maintains a small medical practice in San Diego, California. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, is everybody ready for a deep dive into terpenes? So I do have almost 60 slides, so I usually allow for one per minute, and so I'm probably going to be rushing through this, so we can talk later if you have any questions, or if there's anything that you don't clearly see what I referenced. I probably do have the references, and they just didn't get all into the talk today. So as she said, my primary affiliation is with the Center for the Study of Cannabis and Social Policy, and I'm also currently volunteer faculty at UC San Diego with an appointment pending in the Department of Anesthesiology. So we're going to go through terpenes, not harvesting terpenes, not harvesting cannabis, terpene profiles, definition of product, quality control of product. I'm going to go a little bit more into detail on instructing patients using vaporization, and then some information about the individual terpenes. So I just wanted to start. I think I mentioned yesterday that we have an ongoing cannabis use survey. The website is at the bottom of this. I think if you just type into the Google browser, Cannabis Use Survey Bastille, you'll find a link. It is open. We're still collecting data. And we just have new translations to Italian, German, and French that will soon be online. We'll be collecting data in Europe as well. At this point, it's the largest survey of medical cannabis use yet. So this is from some of the first data we analyzed and published, and we asked people, how do you select the cannabis that you use? And these were responders that identified primarily as medical users, so they could select more than one answer, as you can see. But the number one thing that the most people chose was selection by smell. So many of these responders at the time were coming from Washington State, where patients could walk into a dispensary and there's often just big jars of cannabis with lids, and you could open the lid and smell the product. And that was how often people selected. With the coming of regulation, people no longer have the ability to walk into retail sales stores and smell cannabis any longer. So now they basically have to select based on how it looks, because they can see it in a little window in the package, or by a name, or maybe they're getting to know the producer and the different varietals that that producer has. So in 2009, this group, including Meshulam, published the paper saying that using only the THC content, and now I would say THC or CBD content, to characterize varietals is not sufficient to understand the complex biological effects, and that we should really be looking at a whole chemical fingerprint. And so the term that's often used is entourage. That's a relatively newer term that was actually used in a paper to describe the effect of compounds like anandamide that just have a different carbon tail length and how they all work together. But what we've called this for centuries is plant synergy, as Dr. Jeffrey Hergenrather was using that term. So basically focusing only on the cannabinoid content is really a reductionist approach to botanical medicine in general, but also cannabis. The terpenoids are a fraction, or one other class of compounds that are close cousins to the cannabinoids. They're also produced in the trichome of the plant through similar starting products, just different enzymes. They're the most widespread group of natural products on the planet. Most of them are fat-loving compounds, and they're the flavor and aroma components. In cannabis, you'll usually see them anywhere from 0.5 up to 3.5%. That's in the flower product. And we know that they're biologically active, and so therefore they are playing a role in the overall biological activity of any botanical medicine. So I thought I'd just show you a couple of slides of terpene variability. These are plants that we actually grew in our backyard. We can grow legally in California. And now with adult use, you can still, every person in California has the right to grow 6 plants in their backyard. So we grow from seed. And so this is a Blue Dream varietal. And so the Blue Dream seed is pretty well stabilized, but you can see here that the THC content varied, and along with that, the terpenoid total content correlated with the THC content. But you can see that this fingerprint of the terpenoids is pretty similar between these two Blue Dreams. Here is some seed that came from F1s, so these are not stabilized seed. This was a Granddaddy Purple cross with a CBD varietal from CBD Crew in Spain. And you can see we got variety in the cannabinoid content and also quite a bit of variety in the overall terpene content. Here's the same thing for a plant named Blueberry Tsunami, which is a cross between blueberry and a sour tsunami. And just again, so you can see visually how the terpene profiles can vary even from something called the same name if it's not coming from stabilized seed. And so this is an old paper from 1996 from the University of Mississippi laboratory where they reported here how terpenes are lost over time. So the first in the column A, that's the fresh plant material. So you can see that the monoterpenes at this point were making up 92% of what they analyzed. And then B was after a week in a brown paper bag. And C was after a longer time. And then I think by D, you can see that it had fallen off pretty drastically, that they weren't being lost because I don't know why. But what also was occurring at the same time was this higher percentage of the sesquiterpenes, which are just larger molecules, and they're less likely to be lost because of their heavier weight and their molecular composition. So what we see in the United States and what's talked about is something called the boiling point. And when I first was hearing about this, I thought, well, that just doesn't make sense to me because we're not boiling anything. But luckily, I have a boyfriend who is an analytical chemist, and he could explain all of this to me. So we know that there are specific temperatures that is called a boiling point. And so what the boiling point means is the same thing, like if you were watching some water boil, you're going to see some water that's still in the pot, and then you're going to see this steam that's above it. But it's boiling, right? So it's at the boiling point. And what that really means is that if you were to measure right at the interface of the liquid with the gas, it's at an equilibrium at this point right here. So that's what boiling point actually means, and all of these compounds have a temperature at which they're going to be at that equilibrium. So here's the temperatures for these various compounds. And what you need to know is that when you smoke cannabis and you light a pipe or whatever with a butane lighter, the combustion temperature of butane is 2,000 degrees Celsius. And so you can see that is quite well above the boiling point of these compounds. So you might just think, okay, well, I'm going to burn it, so I'm just going to get more of them by burning it. And is that really true? Because what we know is that as things get hotter and you add more heat to any system, there's an increased chance of chemical reactions occurring in the matrix, so things joining together, or they're just going to be decomposed thermally. So the thought that you're actually really getting all of these terpenes by smoking is probably not true. Somebody needs to do the experiment and measure the amount of terpenes in smoke versus a vapor, but I'm willing to bet that you're going to see a huge difference. So this is a paper that came out a bit later This was done by a laboratory that started out in California. So these were 494 plants, and they represented 35 varietals. So often they had about 5 to 6 replicates of each varietal. They didn't necessarily come from all the same grower. But when they did a principal component analysis looking at the cannabinoid content and the terpene content, and then they plotted them, you can see that for the most part, everything clustered really closely together. And what this represents is a loss of biodiversity. And so as growers, breeders, producers selected mutant plant varietals for high THC content, they also lost the diversity in the terpene content as well. What they show in the circled areas are just 3 varietals that did seem to sort of separate out. Those were Harlequin, which probably separated out for its CBD content, and then 2 other varietals called Trainwreck and Jack Herrera. And their conclusion of the paper is that the current vernacular nomenclature classifying cannabis chemovars as sativa or indica is scientifically indefensible. And yet we continue to use these terms sativa and indica, which I call urban legend. And so they said no distinct sativa group emerged or clustered independently from sativa, so they couldn't find any difference. They took that into account when they did their analysis, whether the plant varietal was told to them to be a sativa or an indica. So what we're often talking about in using cannabis is really trichome harvesting. And so trichomes are on many, many plants, as we discussed earlier. They're the largest plant compound class in the world. And there's a lot of different methods of harvesting trichomes. Dry process is usually called keef, dry ice, finger hash. You can process it in cold water, which is also called hash or bubble or ice wax. And you'll see that once you remove all the plant material and just have the trichome left, you're going to have a much higher THC content by weight. There are solvent processes. Supercritical fluid CO2 extraction is now really popular. And you see products that are labeled up to 90% THC now with that. And then the new trend in the United States is, do you guys know what rosin is? Is anybody using rosin? There's a couple of people that know. So that's just a heat-pressed way of harvesting the trichomes. So people like to smell cannabis. They like to select using their own noses and what appeals to them. Terpene profiles can change with time, with processing. The trichomes are where it's at. Sativa and indica just don't really cut it anymore, even though it'll probably continue to be used for quite a while. And the method of harvesting the trichome is going to affect the final product and what's in it. So let's talk a bit about the processing. So again, here is Blue Dream. I showed this slide yesterday. Blue Dream is thought to be a cross between Blueberry, which is a strain that was bred by DJ Short, crossed with a Super Silver Haze, and then the Super Silver Haze was a cross between a skunk and a haze and a Northern Lights and a haze. So it's considered to be a hybrid because Blueberry is considered to be indica, and the hazes are considered to be sativas. But you can see it's got this nice high amount of alpha-pinene that really balances out the myrcene. So again, here's the same slide I showed you earlier from Elzinga's paper, and I just wanted to show you that again because the next graph, they're going to have removed the Trainwreck and the Jack Herrera and the Harlequin, and what they saw was that Blue Dream clustered. And I think this is as a result of what I said yesterday about the pinene content and the high pinene in Blue Dream that you just don't see very often in many varietals. So Justin Fischetic, he published another paper looking at chemotypes. And so just again here, I wanted to point out Jack Herrera, and I've got that highlighted in yellow. And then if you look at the top, terpenylene, it's really the only one in the entire group that had significant terpenylene other than Trainwreck, which you saw Trainwreck clustered with Jack Herrera, so that's why they clustered together. They both have this compound called terpenylene. And then again, he shows the Blue Dream with the high pinene content. And then when he did the heat maps, there's the Jack Herrera, the only one in the heat map, and the train wreck with the terpinolene, and here's the Blue Dream with the pinene. Uh-oh. I had a really great quote, and now we can't see it. But it was about super silver haze. And so this is, who's been to Amsterdam and has heard of super silver haze? Because if you go to Amsterdam, you'll hear all about super silver haze. So this is just a terpene profile done by a different lab showing the terpinolene content. So in the United States, for the most part, if you see a haze, you can usually think terpinolene. But what happens with processing? So this is a terpene content of the varietal known as Charlotte's Web, which was the foundation for the company that's now known as CW Hemp. And you can see it's got quite a bit of pinene. It's really dominated by myrcene. It's got a little bit of limonene. Here's an analysis of the finished product now of the Charlotte's Web. So it's really interesting to see that there's really no myrcene there anymore. There's really no pinene there anymore. And now we've got really high levels of alpha bisabolol, which is found in a high amount in the plant chamomile, and trans-caryophyllene, which is a different form of beta-caryophyllene. And so these, again, are higher weight compounds that seem to stick around through the processing, but those really lightweight monoterpenes are primarily lost in the process. So my question is, can we still call this Charlotte's Web? Because it's no longer what the original product was. And so the interesting thing about myrcene is that there's data showing that it dimerizes, and this will happen with heat. And so this is the dimerization of myrcene, the structure, but nobody's looking for that. We don't know if it has biological activity, but you can see that all of the myrcene content was lost after processing of this plant. Here's another terpene profile of I think this may also be a CW hemp. So, it's different every time. Here's another hemp-based product that's a liquid, but you can see that the lighter weight compounds are entirely absent. So this is really now a new drug. It's a different product than the flower. So this is some data that is getting ready to be published in Planta Medica. And this is data that we collected. I had the first cannabis laboratory in Washington State, and so we did an experiment where we took the flower material, we analyzed the flower for terpene content, we sent the trim of the flower, which matches the flower for the terpene content, to be processed by supercritical CO2 extraction. And then we compared the terpene content. And so the numbers in boxes is the fold change or the fold increase in the terpene. So if you look at the bottom, you can see the fold increase of the small weight monoterpenes, especially the alpha and beta pinene. We actually had more pinene in the flower than in the finished product from the CO2. So we did not concentrate the monoterpenes to any degree at all, but we significantly concentrated. And look again, you can see that alpha bisabolol. It seems to be one that sticks around in this process. And then the other thing, of course, that's concentrated is the cannabinoid content. So it's just showing the difference here between the flower and the extract. The flower was around an average of 20 to 22%, and then the concentrates were up to 65 to 80% THC content. So the summary is Blue Dream is obviously my favorite varietal. I keep bringing it up again, and you'll probably hear about it again before this is over. My guess is that pinene and maybe terpinolene are associated with sativa-ness. Terpene profiles change when you process the plant. And when you concentrate this and change it, you don't have the same product anymore. So if you've got something you really like and you want to just make it into something to put into a vape pen, but you want to call it the same name, you can't really call it the same name because it's not the same thing anymore. And so we really need terpene testing to understand this whole plant medicine. So I want to talk just a bit about quality control around all of this because, Contamination's a real problem, and we've got more and more reports in the United States coming in as the states are stepping up and now requiring pesticide testing, because this was a paper published by Ethan Russo where they got 85 samples in the state of Washington. They did pesticide testing, and they found that 85% of everything they collected was contaminated with pesticides. 57 of them were concentrate samples, and over 80% of all of these had some form of contamination, either residual solvents. And so when you concentrate it, you concentrate any junk that's on there too. This was another paper where they looked at, this was Jeff Raber from the workshop, where he set up a rig to look at pesticide recovery. So he took plant material, he squirted some pesticide on it, he put it into the heating process and measured how much pesticide was coming off in the smoke or the vapor. And so he's just showing that the filtered water pipe seemed to filter out some of the contamination, but non-filtered or glass pipes, you're getting the full contamination of the pesticides. So what about these vape pens? And these are examples of cartridges. They're now pretty universal that you can, excuse me, you can buy an electronic pen and screw it on, just like with the electronic cigarettes. And if you just look at them and hold them up to the light, you can see how these are very, very dark. You'll see them by the same name. You might see a Blue Dream cartridge and 3 Blue Dream cartridges. They don't even look the same. So you have to really question what you're actually getting. So here's a paper that came out recently in Scientific Reports. They wanted to know, is this a therapeutic alternative to marijuana? Their conclusion was yes. My conclusion is no. Because they're measuring the production of very reactive species called aldehydes. You've probably all heard of formaldehyde and acetaldehyde, and something that is often used to cut these products, because it's now you've got a resin, and to be able to pour it into that cartridge, it has to be pourable, so they'll add propylene glycol. So we know that when these compounds are heated and you inhale them, they are extremely pro-oxidative, which causes damage to the human body. There's the potential for toxicity, and these compounds are also labeled to be carcinogenic. So, to have medical patients inhaling things chronically, maybe on a daily basis, that we know could worsen their health, just doesn't have a sound basis for medicine, really. So what about these additives? We've got propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, and glycerol, when it is heated, breaks down into a product called acrolein. And acrolein is highly electrophilic, or it'll cause oxidative damage in the body. It'll rapidly use up glutathione in the body and inhibit the enzyme that makes glutathione, and glutathione is one of our most important antioxidants that our body makes. So this was a paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine showing the same type of data, that when you heat these compounds, they produce aldehydes. And the other thing to consider is with the manufacturer of the device, the pen itself, it can be really poor or shoddy manufacturing where there is solder and metals may actually leak out and people may be getting heavy metals into their system. There's a review of 4 articles saying that, we really need to look at this more. People are thinking e-cigarettes are such a great alternative, but now what are people inhaling? And ironically, here's a patient of mine in San Diego, and his picture just appeared in a periodical or a local small newspaper where they did a story about the pediatric epilepsy support group, and here he is using a vape pen to get his CBD. So concentrates are going to also concentrate impurities. Some of these are dangerous. Aldehydes and carbonyl compounds are highly reactive. They don't promote health. And you could actually be getting heavy metals. So for these reasons, I don't recommend using vape pens to my patients. But what I do recommend, and I think I spoke of yesterday, is vaporization of flower. And I've done this for quite a while. I've continued to do it. I don't have any problem from the support of the doctors at the University of San Diego in California for teaching patients to inhale using vaporization of flower. So here's a survey where they asked people, how often are you vaporizing? And 45% said a vape pen, but only 23% were using they said a tabletop. So the most common one is called the vaporizer, the Volcano, made by the company Stores and Bickle. So that's probably, there's a few other tabletop devices. They're all kind of bulky. You couldn't take it anywhere with you, not portable. So there are alternatives to this. These are two handheld versions. They're identical. The top one has the temperature controller on the device. The bottom one just has a temperature controller on a smartphone app. So most of my patients that are older, of course, say, I don't want to have anything to do with an app, but they can get the larger model. And this one's a really nice one. It's got the top piece on there where the mouthpiece is actually a cooling chamber. And so it actually cools the vapor. And so, some people are really sensitive even to the temperature of the vapor coming in. So you can start with a really low temperature. I tell them there's 3 ways to control the potency. 1 is the temperature. 2 is by the potency of what they put in the heating chamber. And 3 is how much they take into their lungs. So I have them start at a low temperature with a low dose of THC and with 1 inhalation, and they can go up from there. This is another little handheld one. It doesn't cool the vapor. It's about this tall, so the distance from the heating chamber to the mouthpiece is really short, so the vapor's pretty hot. This is another one that does have a cooling chamber. You can see where you put the plant material in, and then there's a metal plate, and by the time the vapor reaches the throat, it's been cooled a little bit. And then these are expensive. I mean, they're an investment. And so a lot of my patients don't want to invest in this before they know if they're going to like it or it's going to work for them. So I ask the companies for demo models. This is a really cheap one they can buy online, but the heating chamber is directly below the mouthpiece. And so the vapor coming off of this one's really, really hot. But with all these, you can control the temperature one way or another. And so using vaporization is a means of harm reduction because you're not combusting anything. So you're not running the risk of inhaling particulate matter or having the amount of carbon monoxide that you get from combustion. It limits the exposures to others for secondhand smoke. So a lot of my patients are concerned about that. Is this going to smell? And it does not leave the smell like on your mouth, on clothing. It doesn't hang in fabrics in your house. It's a vapor. They can even just step outside briefly and exhale if they want none of it. It can be really discreet. It'll reduce symptoms of chronic bronchitis associated with smoking. And there's, interestingly, Tilray, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov, and they have a study where they're going to be studying vaporization of cannabis for actually improving symptoms of COPD. So I had a patient the other day say, oh, no, I can't inhale anything. My pulmonologist said, no, I can't smoke. And I told her about vaporization. She said, no, he told me I can't inhale anything. And so it'll be interesting to learn if using vaporization of cannabis, because it's a bronchodilator, because it has antimicrobial action of the terpenes, might it improve COPD? So we're going to find out. So how do you vaporize? I tell them to start with, they just put their mouth on like it's a straw and sip on it. They want to kind of make sure some vapor's coming out. That first taste, they're going to really get the terpenes in there because they're going to come out at low temperatures. And then, just go ahead and fill up their lungs. They don't have to hold it and just let it out, and they should see the vapor. And then, just sit back and wait 10 minutes. And I showed you yesterday, they're often starting with a plant material that's 1% THC or less. And they can add THC flower to that pinch by pinch until they can find the dose that works for them. But I also encourage them to give it a 2-week trial instead of just trying it once or twice and saying, no, I don't like it, it's not going to work for me. I really encourage them to use it every day, at least once a day, for 2 weeks before they come back and tell me that they don't like it or they're not going to use it. And I think we covered this yesterday. When should they vape versus taking something orally? And I say anytime because, as Dr. Hergenrather talked about, and I showed you through processing, you're losing a lot of these terpenes. And so missing out on some of the potential medical benefit. So vape first, but if you need extended relief for pain, you can take something oral. I have a lot of patients trying to wean off of Marinol, which is just a purified form of THC, and I'll use a direct, exact same dose. If they're on a 5 milligram dose of Marinol, I'll have them use a 1-to-1 CBD to THC, 5 milligrams of each. If it's 10 milligrams of Marinol, 10 milligrams of THC with 10 milligrams of CBD. And minimize the use of vape pens. If they feel like they have to do it and have to have something in public that's quick, that's okay, but I don't want them using it chronically or all the time as their primary means of using cannabis. So again, terpene qualification, these are 2 different CBD varietals. And so, serendipitously, they both have pinene in them, which I like because I like my patients to start out using Blue Dream, and so they can mix the Blue Dream with a CBD varietal to reduce the THC content but still be getting the pinene. And then here's what I was talking about earlier, the haze with the high terpenylene content. And then the Jack Herer, or often anything that has the name Jack in it that's related to Jack Herer, you may see the terpenylene content. So sometimes I have them preload with CBD or start with a hemp-based formula taking orally, or just the ACDC varietal or CBD dominant varietal for inhalation by itself before they even add the THC into it. And some of them are just really scared of getting high or having any side effect, and they feel more comfortable doing it this way. So vaporization of flower is my first choice for administration. It can be titrated, and I talked to you about 3 ways I tell them to titrate it. And the nice thing about it is they can make adjustments. They can still use the vaporizer, and they can try. I tell them, this is just an introductory pack, and I'm going to teach you how to shop and what terpenes are, and you're welcome to go try any other product. Because if you find this doesn't work for you, I can't rule out that a different varietal with a very different terpene content might have a different effect for you. So let's talk about some terpenes just as an overview. Dioscorides, who was considered to be the father of plant medicine or phytotherapy, he dedicated his first work to aromatic plants. And we've shown that there are correlations between the amount of these volatile compounds or the terpenes and that plant as a medical agent. They're generally recognized as safe by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Pugilalone is an example of one that's not. And what I learned in medical school was that essential oils, we know quite a lot about essential oils, but only applied topically or inhaled. We don't have a lot of hard data on ingesting essential oils, and we were told to be very cautious with it and to only use drop doses. So what's a drop dose when you're inhaling it? We don't really have any information there yet. But we know that inhalation, there's really good bioavailability, just like with the cannabinoids, versus ingesting them. But we need more research, of course. So I think Jeffrey already covered some of this. They are metabolized by the liver. Here's a little bit on pharmacology. Here's a case report of somebody who took an overdose, ingested 400 to 500 milliliters of pine oil. And so they actually did the analysis of some of the different compounds in the pine oil. And he was admitted to the clinic, and had symptoms, but did not die. So this did suggest that the monoterpenes are being absorbed in the gastrointestinal tract. And we know that they are metabolized by the liver. So again, the liver gets first pass of everything when you eat something. So if you're eating terpenes, which we eat every day, in all the foods that we eat, we're always eating terpenes. We just don't know specifically how they're getting changed in the liver. Are those metabolites biologically active? And we know when we inhale them, we're getting them in their original form, and we know a bit about their biological activity. So how would this differ from using Marinol, which is the FDA-approved drug of THC? Well, in the whole plant, they may be getting CBD, which we think modulates the psychoactivity of THC. It seems to delay the onset and prolong the effects of THC. We know that terpenes are binding complementary receptors So we have a researcher who may be in the audience today, and they're starting to look at terpene binding to cannabinoid receptors, but there's already data out there showing other receptors that terpenes bind to. There's also information on terpenes as enzyme inhibitors in our body, so inhibiting the activity of enzymes. And so we know that this synergistic effect is through multi-target effects. It may be changing the pharmacokinetics and the pharmacodynamics of how fast it gets in, or the overall effect, that's the pharmacodynamic. Other interactions, microbial effects, and modulating the adverse events of getting too much THC. But what kind of questions do we need to answer? Because now what's happening in Southern California as we're taking off towards adult use in a huge marketplace is that the people doing the manufacturing have picked up on the importance of the terpenes, and so now they're saying with their oral products, oh, we've put the terpenes back in there. This one's got such and such and so and so. And it's like, okay, well, great. We don't know what their biological activity is when you ingest them versus inhaling, so you can't directly compare. But we do know that we have these enteroendocrine cells in our gut that are chemosensors, so different from our olfactory bulb. Do the terpenes bind to these and have some signaling there? We don't know. And so maybe we should do direct comparisons of inhaling the terpenes, like through vaporization, and administering it orally and comparing the effects. So I think we really need to hold off before we start making claims about products just because we've added the terpenes back in. In the marketplace and all along the West Coast, everybody is now very wise to this. They now have processes in their extractions where they're using distillation to collect the essential oil fraction, and they're actually using that essential oil fraction to make the rosin pourable instead of using the propylene glycol. So that's good, except, again, the other thing that they're doing is they're starting to add maybe more terpenes than were there originally, because you can buy the terpenes now. There are companies selling, you can buy a large bottle of pinene, and you could just add it back into your concentrate for vaporization, or for the vape pens. So I just want to cover a bit about some of these monoterpenes, because these are the ones that most often get lost, and I think that we know quite a bit about their biological activity, and so I think they're important to the whole plant. So what is beta-myrcene? It's a really common compound in floral scents. It's used in the manufacture of perfumes. Some say it has a peppery or clove-like smell, and you will find it in clove. It's been shown to be an analgesic, maybe by an anti-inflammatory mechanism, and it's been reputed to be responsible for the couch lock effect of maybe indica strains. I took my mom to visit a retail store in Washington a couple of weeks ago. She's from Texas, and she walked into a huge weed store. She's been anti-cannabis her whole life, and she was reading some of the history and the descriptors, and she saw that couch lock, and she said, "Couch lock, now I want that." And so we think it has maybe a muscle relaxant effect, but that at high doses it may actually cause anxiety. What about limonene? It's the second most widely distributed terpenoid in nature. It's extremely bioavailable, we know this about it, up to 70% by pulmonary delivery, but this is something I was trained to use in my naturopathic medicine training to treat esophageal reflux and changes that can occur in the esophagus, so it's got anti-mutagenic properties. There's interesting historical data on using citrus as an antidote to THC intoxication. Are you guys familiar with that? Ethan Russo discussed that in his paper. In animal studies, it's been shown to have direct pharmacologic effect. It's been shown to ameliorate depressive symptoms. This was in a nursing home where they were infusing limonene into the air for the nursing home patients. And there's other studies showing the anti-mutagenic effects of limonene. So here's really my favorite, pinene. It is the most widely distributed terpene in nature. abundant in pine trees, of course. Its biological activity has been reported to be anti-inflammatory, bronchodilatory, antimicrobial, and in various assays shown to inhibit acetylcholine esterase. And so I was talking about acetylcholine yesterday and its importance in the immune function and the neural immune reflex. And we know that this is the action of a major drug to treat dementia. And so increasing acetylcholine to a certain level seems to be a good thing. This is also what nerve gas agents do. So pining doesn't appear to do it to the same degree as nerve gas agents because you don't get the same type of effects. But acetylcholinesterase inhibition is of real interest, and THC has also been shown to inhibit this enzyme. So the other place where acetylcholine is important is it's the neurotransmitter at the junction of the nerve and the muscle. And so I had somebody say to me earlier that he had previously smoked cannabis, and then he got a vaporizer and started using the vaporizer, and he said, I really like it so much better. And I said, what do you like about it? And he said, well, smoking just made me feel so heavy, and when I use the vaporizer, I feel like I want to exercise. So who knows, maybe he's inhaling some pinene and he's feeling that his muscles want to be used because of that acetylcholine. So what may have been known as a sativa varietal may be one that's higher in pinene because it's got this more stimulant effect. And if so, maybe these are good varietals to look to for treating certain conditions or cognitive decline. Linalool is the major compound that's in lavender, and so most people are comfortable with lavender as being something that's calming, using lavender oil. There's lavender ice cream, lavender tea, and this is interesting because it's actually been shown to bind the GABA receptor. And so this is a strategy for treating seizure. This is a strategy for treating anxiety. It's also been shown to bind glutamate and opiate receptors. So here's in one study they showed that it decreased opioid use post-surgically. That was in one study. And then this is the one compound that is not a monoterpene, but beta-caryophyllene is a bicyclic sesquiterpene. And so some reports say it's the most common sesquiterpenoid found in cannabis. I don't know if that's really true anymore because we've got so much hybridization and varietals going on. But it is a dietary cannabinoid, and you're eating it all the time. So you're eating something that is affecting your endocannabinoid system. But it's primarily the CB2 receptor, which doesn't have the same psychoactivity. CB2 receptor is the one that's primarily on your immune cells and seems to be doing the immune talking. It was shown to be an anti-inflammatory through prostaglandin E1, protecting the gastric system, potential analgesic and anti-inflammatory effects, and so potentially good for inflammatory type disorders such as rheumatoid arthritis, in any kind of inflammatory pain or inflammation related with pain. Caryophyllene oxide is the oxide version of this compound, common to the plant Melissa officinalis, which is also known as lemon balm. And supposedly it's the one that dogs were trained to smell. Whether that's true or not, we're not sure, but that comes from one report. But it has been shown also to have antifungal activity. So I'm going to close with talking about terpenylene. We don't know a lot about terpenylene, but you saw that it's kind of a rare one to be there. And so it's one to keep an eye on and think about, if you're going to be breeding, interested in breeding or growing varietals and you want to have some diversity in what you have to offer, think about looking for the terpenylene. And one reason you might be interested, who knows the Melaleuca plant? Everybody in Australia should raise your hand because it's native to here. It's known as tea tree. So we know it's highly antioxidative, only a little bit less than vitamin E or alpha tocopherol. It has been shown to have a sedative effect in mice. Again, this could be dose dependent because if it's associated with sativa-like strains, you'd think of it being more of a stimulant. An anti-hyperalgesic effect in for inflammatory pain in a mouse model. And this effect was, they demonstrated it to be through a serotonin receptor. And so using selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors is a strategy for pain relief as an add-on drug. So I often, if I have patients not responding to the pinene, the first thing I'll tell them to do is to switch over to a varietal with terpinolene. So here is just a beautiful picture of these trichomes. This is an unusual plant that's got some pigment, and you can see that pigment seeping in to the trichome. So now what? I mean, what do we do with all this information? Even in the States, we don't often have these terpene profiles. The dispensary I work with, the reason I work with them is because they provide these with the plant varietals that they have, and so that allows me to help guide the patients and educate the patients. It's not mandated in the state of Washington for medical grade product to have terpene testing. I don't think that's going to occur in California either. Producers are unlikely to want to pay for this, so it's going to really have to be consumer driven, that you're just going to have to demand that you want to see this. You don't want to rely on a name. You don't want to rely on what somebody's just telling you. You want to see the data for yourself. So there's this there's something called xenohormesis, and so this is the definition. Plant molecules interacting with and modulating key regulators of mammalian physiology in ways that are beneficial to health. So we've co-evolved with plants. We have plants growing all around us that are subjected to the same environment that we are subjected to, and it makes a lot of sense to use cannabis or any botanical medicine that is grown in the same environment where you live, because you're going to be exposed to the same environment, and this is a way that plants and humans may be talking together. It's surprising that we understand so little about why many plant molecules are safe and beneficial to health. As we achieve a more detailed understanding of the numerous interactions of plant molecules with mammalian proteins, there may come a day when calling a plant molecule dirty will be interpreted as a compliment. And so the way that I'm moving forward with this is through sort of a new field called computational biology. So we have a great department at UCSD for computational biology. And what they do is create network maps. So this is an example of a network map. And all the little shapes you see are called nodes. The lines between the nodes are called connections. You can mathematically measure what's called connectivity. You can map out entire systems. And so this field that's within systems biology revolves around the principle that the phenotype, or what's being expressed by the living organism, reflects a bunch of things going on, multitudes of molecular interactions occurring on various levels all at the same time, and they all come together to produce what you're looking at right here, what you're looking at, or the chemotype also of the cannabis plant. And so I'm hoping to be working with computational biology to start creating maps like this for cannabis plants, looking at not only the cannabinoid content, but the terpenes, and then eventually maybe we'll extend that out into flavonoids and other classes. So here's a picture. This was a paper, I took this from a paper where they did this with Chinese medicine. So Chinese medicine has been around centuries. They have complex formulas of many, many plants together. So they looked at formulas for cardiovascular health, and they started mapping the compounds in the plants and matching it with symptoms or targets for cardiovascular health, and showed that they could actually map this and show correlations. So that's what computational biology is. So in summary, terpenes are highly bioavailable by inhalation. We don't know whether you take them orally if you have the same kind of effect. These terpenes are allowing for multi-target effects and just a broader type of medicine than reducing it to the cannabinoid content. We may be able to target specific terpene profiles for better therapeutic efficacy. That would be ideal. And that's why I'm happy with the whole plant and employing the terpenes and having people inhale with vaporization. Thank you for your attention.